Stalkers have a new tool for tracking and monitoring their victims. They're there for a stalker or an eavesdropper or your wiretapping. If the stalker or aggressor can get a hold of that phone or computer, this software can be installed.
On November 13th, 2024, a user by the name of Shimakaze would make a rather concerning post on the r/webfishing subreddit. The post was titled, "Something Else in My World?" and enclosed a picture of the OP fishing on a dock at Pawprint Point, seemingly by herself. However, a closer look at the lighthouse would reveal that Shimakaze was anything but alone. This post quickly rose to the top of the webfishing subreddit, as different users attempted to figure out who or what this creature was. Some thought that this could be an ultra-rare event, something scripted to happen to people who fish by themselves once in a blue moon. Webfishing had only been out for a few weeks at this point, so it's possible that there were still some secrets the community had yet to uncover. Others considered that it could be a hacker, such as the infamous Grincher who had been plaguing the game since it launched. However, this would be inconsistent with how the Grincher typically acted in-game, making this idea a bit more far-fetched. And of course, others simply assumed that it was a prank, someone attempting to etch a piece of fiction into webfishing's lore as the game began to take off in popularity. This was the most probable answer, as the other two explanations for how a stalker managed to enter a person's solo lobby seemed completely unlikely. But as I looked deeper into this story, I uncovered a rabbit hole that goes much deeper than this initial post. I quickly learned that Shimakaze's experience, real or fake, wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the webfishing community, there have been repeated sightings of these entities, sneaking into lobbies without a trace, and behaving in strange, off-putting ways. They don't usually interact with other players, choosing instead to stay at a distance, watching. These are the Cryptids, a group of players who have chosen to forego the socializing and friendship building that webfishing is known for, in favor of putting other players on edge with odd, stalker-like behavior. Over the past 2 weeks, I've been obsessed with learning more about this subculture in the webfishing community, scouring the internet, as well as webfishing itself, for evidence of these players out in the wild. I wanted to know what was so appealing about becoming a cryptid, sacrificing the ability to interact with others just to freak people out. In an effort to answer this question, I interviewed other players, reviewed other reported sightings, and even had a cryptid sneak into one of my lobbies and stalk me personally. And after all of it, I think I have an answer, and it may not be the one that you expect. These are the Cryptids of webfishing, and how a subculture of players have turned this chill fishing game into something much more paranoid. When I first began investigating this subculture, I started by looking at the other posts made on the r/webfishing subreddit regarding these cryptids. Around the same time as Shimakaze's post, user XHC had made a post from the opposing perspective. Rather than being stalked, XHC was the stalker. Many commenters noted the connection between this post and the one made by Shimakaze. It was as if they were, potentially, connected. Researching even deeper, a user by the name of Vice12 also made a post a few weeks prior to Shimakaze's. This post, I believe, was the genesis for the cryptid subculture. The topic of this post was regarding a shadow cat slowly walking a path around the map. This entity, dubbed Void Cat, has a rather storied history, with appearances across several lobbies and even a potential ARG based off of the cat's appearance. This single cryptid went to many lobbies and left various breadcrumbs and clues. These clues contained multiple codes that eventually led to a YouTube channel. But while some of these Void Cat appearances are tied to a single user in their augmented reality game, others have taken the Void Cat's appearance and used it to be their own kind of cryptid, separate from any ongoing ARG. In my research, I believe that this post by Vice12 about Void Cat is where the cryptid subculture originated from. The lone match that started the forest fire. Basically every single cryptid I've come across in my investigation in some way resembles Void Cat, either in behavior or in appearance. If Shimakaze's post wasn't a hoax, and a person actually did sneak into his lobby and stalk him, then they were likely seeking to emulate this infamous creature in the burgeoning webfishing lore. The word lore might seem like a strange word to use when discussing these entities, but I believe it's more fitting than you may think. In games like Dark Souls, the lore present in the game is created entirely by the developers. Every story that the player can uncover was intentionally placed by the writers of the game in order to better explain the world, and the player's decisions, actions, and interactions with the environment don't impact the game's story or world in any way. However, in a game like web fishing, the game itself only creates part of the game's overall lore. Because players are always interacting with one another, and are able to create and roleplay as characters within each lobby, creatures like the Cryptids are able to be added to web fishing's lore and world by the players, without ever being acknowledged by the developers. It's similar to how culture and lore might develop amongst a community in a long-running Minecraft server, much like 2B2T. Web fishing empowers its players to mythologize the community interactions it thrives so much within, which is why I've been so fascinated by Cryptid players and their habits. But right now I was only looking from a distance, and it wouldn't be long before I'd come face to face with a Cryptid myself. While I was fishing in a personal lobby, a player going by 3 question marks joined my game. I didn't think much of it at first. In fact, I'm not sure if I even noticed that the player had joined. That was, however, until I noticed a face peeking out from the trees. It genuinely freaked me out to see its small head peering from around the corner, but I quickly began recording to try and document the creature's actions. There's 2 different aspects of cryptid behavior that I find most common amongst the ones I've seen: the way they interact with the environment and the way they interact with other players. The former refers to how the cryptid typically uses objects around the map to its advantage in maximizing its creepiness. This includes hiding behind trees, standing atop the lighthouse, or even using the bush propped as a makeshift hiding spot in any area of the map. It's also not uncommon to see these cryptids crouch walking everywhere they go, slowly trotting across Pawprint Point in a downtrodden, almost depressing manner. The second behavioral pattern is found in their interactions with other players. That is to say, there isn't any. In my experience, players often respond to cryptids by attempting to get them to break character. This is often done through emotes, in-game text chat, or by incessantly kissing the cryptid until they succumb under the weight of embarrassment and run away. The existence of a cryptid, someone who stands opposed to the cheery atmosphere web fishing offers, is often very troubling to most players. As such, it's typical for players to try and bring back balance to the vibe of the lobby by making the cryptid act normally. The cryptid's MO, of course, is to act completely unfazed, pretending as if nothing players do to him is really happening. The goal of the cryptid is almost always to leave players off-put, so allowing for players to interact with them without any reaction is usually the best path in accomplishing that. After encountering my own personal web fishing stalker, I began hopping from lobby to lobby in an effort to gather more footage of cryptids out in the wild. In doing this, I began interviewing players in the lobbies I visited, as I wanted to know if others were having similar experiences to the one I had just had. Many of these players did report either hearing about the existence of cryptids or encountering one themselves. A fellow web fishing creator named Junko also told me about a cryptid he encountered called the Lobby Inspector during one of his streams.
Who the hell is this? How are you doing today? Look, they're just gonna... Can you tilt your head up and down in web fishing? No, you fucking can't. Wait, no, you can't. You can't do that.
As I encountered more and more of these cryptids, I continued asking the same question to myself that I had at the beginning of my investigation. What enjoyment were these people getting out of behaving so strangely? I had learned much more about these individuals' behavior, history, and reputation, but in discovering their motive, I felt that I still didn't have enough information to form a concrete conclusion. Despite this, I still had one more tactic that would allow me to get into the mind of a cryptid, to really break down why they act the way that they do. In order to do this, I had to become one. Before concluding my investigation, I wanted to try out what it was like to be a cryptid, in an effort to figure out what made it so compelling for these people. When deciding what kind of cryptid I wanted to be, I ended up choosing the Void Cat, as its more dynamic playstyle is something that I felt would be more enjoyable for me. After making my decision, I suited up and got to work. I joined several lobbies, trying out a slightly different tactic in each one in an attempt to gather as much attention as possible from my fellow animals. I anticipated that this would be fairly easy, but there were a few challenges I didn't quite expect. Firstly, getting the initial attention of players was very much a hit or miss task. There's actually a lot of nuance and balancing in being a cryptid. You have to make yourself seen by other players, but without being so obvious that the fear of your presence isn't really felt. I often found that players were, intentionally or not, completely avoiding acknowledging my presence, which made the satisfaction of freaking people out kind of absent. However, when I did get people's attention, their reactions were certainly worth the effort. The initial fear and surprise that people experienced was often met with curiosity, as the people in the lobbies wanted to know why I was behaving so strangely. This led to them, as mentioned earlier, attempting to get me to break character. On most occasions I didn't budge, but on one occasion I did decide to test the waters a bit on how people responded to cryptids entering their lobby. After watching a group of people from the forest and lighthouse, I decided to see what would happen if I put back on my typical outfit and wandered back in to fish with the group. But even though I had returned to the appearance of a normal player, the other members of the lobby still didn't seem to want to interact with me. It appears as if being a cryptid is as isolating as it is engaging. The lifestyle requires players to avoid web phishing social gameplay and instead completely separate themselves from others, which can result in a playstyle that feels incredibly lonely. After acting as a cryptid myself, I finally felt I could understand why it was so compelling. At this point, I thought I finally had an answer, and with that, I ended my investigation and began reviewing what I had learned. After looking back at the initial Reddit post that started my investigation, a common response I saw was a comparison between Shimakaze's experience and that of the infamous Minecraft urban legend, Herobrine. The similarities were obvious. Both stories featured a strange entity that resembled a typical player who appeared in a person's game without their knowledge, acting strangely, stalking them, and otherwise behaving weirdly. However, a massive difference between these two stories is how they can potentially be recreated by real players in their respective games. In Minecraft, there's not a server browser that would allow for a player to sneak into someone's world and behave similarly to Herobrine, and any fear that could be potentially created by such an encounter is heavily lessened anyways, since other players could simply walk up to Herobrine and kill him like any other player. This factor, at least for me, somewhat limits how off-putting Herobrine can really be, because there's no way for Herobrine to really exist in a game for the average person. However, in web phishing, it's fairly easy for players to sneak into lobbies without being detected. The public server browser gives players immense freedom in joining any random person's lobby dressed however they want, allowing for cryptids to easily disguise themselves as regular players, only to show their true form after finding a good spot to watch from. The believability of web phishing's cryptids is one of the things that makes them so compelling, and one of the biggest factors in why they can be so creepy. But even more than the realism of the cryptid is just how well these players manage to fit with web phishing's overall aesthetic and vibe. Though the outer veneer of the game is very obviously cutesy and happy-go-lucky, there's an underlying edge to web phishing that can make it feel much less welcoming at times. If you've ever booted up a lobby of Paw Print Point by yourself, you likely know what I mean. Without the presence of other players, web phishing can begin to feel less like a peaceful take on the social MMO and much more like a psychological horror game. The soft noises of fishing and walking around alone surrounded by the endless fog of the ocean offer this sense of loneliness and potentially fear. It's as if, without other people, the life of web phishing simply isn't the same. This feeling and atmosphere is the contrast to web phishing's typical upbeat, cheery demeanor. It's a part of the game that's rarely experienced, but if you pay close attention, it's always there. The cryptids of web phishing are players expressing this aspect of the game. They fit in so well because they represent the part of web phishing that maybe isn't so happy all the time, hearkening to the dark atmosphere that lies in the nooks and crannies of Paw Print Point. Between the existence of the void and the spectral bones littered around the map, players who roleplay as cryptids fit right in. In fact, they fit in so well that they could make someone question whether these players are really players at all. Maybe Shimakaze's supposed hoax wasn't actually a hoax in the first place. Maybe there really are entities lurking in the shadows of web phishing, appearing just ever so often when a player boots up a lonely lobby for themselves. A shadow cast by the lightness and brevity that's so commonly found in web phishing.